The morning it happened, the world felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the weather, though the sky hung low, gray and swollen, as if it were about to weep. It wasn't the coffee either, though it tasted bitter, like something forgotten on the stove too long. No, it was the silence. That thick, unnatural kind of silence that clings to the air before something in your life breaks. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was the sound of a boundary being crossed, the sound of trust collapsing in on itself. When the phone rang, it startled me. I remember staring at it for a moment, watching it vibrate on the kitchen counter, feeling an instinctive weight in my chest, the way you do when bad news is circling, looking for a place to land. It was my mother. I could hear it in her breathing before she even said a word, the tight, uneven rhythm of someone holding back panic. "You might want to sit down," she said softly, almost rehearsed, as if she'd been practicing those words all morning. The sound of her voice cracked something open in me. "What happened?" I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. There was a pause, long enough to feel like she was trying to protect me from the truth, or maybe herself from saying it out loud. Then she whispered it. "It's your sister. It's Leah." The name landed like a drop of ink in water, spreading, darkening everything around it. "What about her?" I asked, my heart already knowing it wouldn't like the answer. My mother's next words came out in pieces, each one colder than the last. "She sold your father's watch." For a second, I didn't understand. The words didn't fit together in my mind. She sold it. My father's watch. The one that wasn't supposed to be touched. Ever. The one I kept in the top drawer of the old oak desk in our family home, wrapped in the same handkerchief he used to carry. The one I'd promised him, promised myself, I'd protect. It wasn't just metal and glass. It was him. It was Sunday mornings at the breakfast table when he'd check the time before heading to church. It was the faint tick I'd fall asleep to when he let me hold it in my hand as a kid. It was the heartbeat of a man who'd taught me everything about loyalty, sacrifice, and the quiet weight of love, and now, she'd traded it for Botox. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound that didn't even feel like mine. "She what?" I asked, though I'd heard every word clearly. My mother's silence said everything. "She said she needed the money," she finally added, voice trembling, "for a procedure. Something cosmetic." I felt my grip on the counter tighten until my knuckles went white. "Cosmetic," I repeated, tasting the word like poison. My mother tried to soothe me, said something about how Leah was going through a rough time, how she'd been struggling with her appearance lately, how maybe it wasn't just vanity. But I couldn't hear her anymore. The world had gone muffled like I was underwater. All I could think about was that watch. Gone. The last real piece of my father. I hung up without saying goodbye. The next thing I remember is being in my car, keys shaking in my hand, engine roaring louder than it should. I don't even recall the drive. Only flashes of movement, red lights blurring into streaks, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached, and the familiar pit forming in my stomach. The one that came every time Leah hurt someone she loved. My sister had always been chaos wrapped in charm. When we were younger, she had this magnetic energy, the kind that could pull anyone into her orbit. Teachers adored her, friends envied her, and I protected her, even when she didn't deserve it. Especially then. But as the years passed, her light twisted into something else, something hungry. She started measuring her worth in reflections, in filters, in fleeting validation. And no matter how much I tried to pull her back, she kept drifting toward the shallows of her own insecurities. When I reached her apartment, I didn't even knock. I pushed the door open and stepped into the artificial glow of her ring light. The place smelled like perfume and hairspray and something sterile, the scent of new skin. She was standing in front of a mirror, tilting her head slightly as she examined her reflection. When she saw me, her smile was small, nervous. "You talked to Mom," she said. Not a question, a statement. I just stood there, staring at her face. It was different, smoother, too perfect in the wrong ways. "You sold Dad's watch," I said, my voice breaking in places I didn't expect. She turned, her eyes flickering with guilt, then defiance. "I needed it," she said simply, as if that made it okay. "You needed it?" I repeated, stepping closer. You needed Botox more than you needed to respect the one thing he left us? She rolled her eyes, a gesture so painfully familiar it almost broke me. Don't be dramatic, she said. It's just a watch. Those 4 words hit harder than any slap could. Just a watch. I felt something twist inside me. Grief, anger, disbelief all blending into something jagged. It wasn't just a watch, I said through clenched teeth. It was him. It was Dad. Her expression softened for half a second, but then she turned away, muttering something about how I always romanticized the past, how I didn't understand what it felt like to look in the mirror and not recognize yourself. I almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. But pity evaporates when betrayal stands that close to you. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. The drive home felt endless, my chest tight with a mix of rage and sadness. The city lights blurred into ghostly streaks outside the window, and all I could think about was time, the cruel, relentless ticking of it, how Dad's watch had outlasted him, outlasted grief, outlasted everything, until now. When I got home, I went straight to the drawer where it used to be, opened it, and stared at the empty handkerchief. It still smelled faintly of him, of cologne and metal and time itself. I sank to the floor, holding it like it could fill the space the watch had left behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt too loud. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the house settling, all of it sounded like accusation. Around midnight, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one of Leah and me from years ago, both of us laughing, her head on my shoulder, Dad's watch peeking from his wrist in the corner of the frame. We looked so young, so whole. I wanted to hate her. I tried to. But hate is never clean when it's tangled with love. By dawn, exhaustion hit me like a wave, and I finally drifted off, though sleep brought no peace. I dreamt of Dad, sitting at the kitchen table, winding the watch, looking at me with that half-smile of his. "You can't stop time," he said, "but you can choose how you spend it." When I woke up, I was crying. The next day, I didn't hear from Leah or Mom. The silence felt heavier now, a kind of mourning. I told myself I'd move on, that it was just an object, that Dad wouldn't have wanted me to hold on to bitterness. But grief has a way of disguising itself as forgiveness. I spent the day trying to work, pretending I wasn't waiting for her to call, to apologize, to say she'd made a mistake. She didn't. Instead, as the sun began to set, my phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but something inside me said, "Answer." I did. "Is this Mr. or—" The voice on the other end was calm, official. "Yes," I said slowly. "This is the local police department. We need to ask you a few questions about your sister, Leah." For a second, I thought I misheard. My throat went dry. "What about her?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. There was a pause. The kind of pause that means the next sentence is going to change everything. "We have reason to believe she may have been involved in an incident earlier today," the officer said. "We found something that belongs to you." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Another pause. Then, "It's a watch. An antique men's watch. Does that sound familiar? If you were in my place, what would you do now? Would you answer the call? Or let the past stay buried? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your take. Because what came next didn't just rewrite what I thought I knew about my sister. It shattered everything I believed about love, family, and the things we think we're protecting. When the officer mentioned the watch, my heartbeat stuttered, then started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt the world tilt slightly, like gravity had shifted and I was no longer standing on anything solid. "Yes," I said, my voice cracking. "It's my father's. Where did you find it?" The officer hesitated again, and that silence told me whatever came next wasn't going to be simple. "We'd prefer to explain in person," he said. "Can you come down to the station?" There was no choice in his tone, just quiet expectation. I agreed before I could overthink it. 10 minutes later, I was in my car, driving through streets that looked too normal for the chaos unraveling inside me. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed like anxious thoughts. The smell of old paper and burnt coffee clung to the air. A young officer led me into a small room with beige walls and no windows. On the metal table in front of me sat a clear evidence bag. Inside it was the watch, my father's watch. Even through the plastic, it seemed to hum with memory. The gold casing was scratched, a small crack running across the glass like a vein of regret. My breath caught. "That's it," I whispered, reaching instinctively before stopping myself. The officer, a woman about my age, with kind but cautious eyes, nodded. "It was found in a pawn shop downtown," she said. "The owner recognized it from a report we circulated this morning." I frowned. "A report?" She nodded again. "Your sister filed a police report early today. Said the watch had been stolen from her apartment last night." The words hit like cold water. "Stolen?" I repeated. "From her apartment? You mean the one she sold?" The officer raised an eyebrow, flipping through a folder. "According to her statement, she claims she never sold it. She said someone broke in and took it." My head was spinning. I didn't know what to believe. Not anymore. "That doesn't make sense," I muttered. "She told my mother she sold it. She admitted it to me." The officer leaned back slightly, studying me. "Would you be willing to make a statement to that effect?" I nodded automatically, though my mind was still somewhere else, tangled in disbelief. As she handed me a clipboard, another officer appeared at the door. "She's here," he said simply. My stomach dropped. Leah. The air in the room seemed to tighten as she stepped inside. Her hair was tied up messily, makeup smudged around her tired eyes. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the effortless confidence she always carried. When she saw the watch on the table, her lips parted, trembling. "You found it," she said softly, almost relieved. But when her gaze flicked to me, that relief turned to tension. "You told them I sold it, didn't you?" I opened my mouth, but the officer cut in. "Ms., please take a seat." Leah sat down, crossing her arms defensively. The room filled with the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the ticking clock on the wall, a cruel echo of the watch that started all this. The officer began asking questions. When did she last see the watch? Who knew she had it? Had anyone been in her apartment recently? Leah answered each one like she was choosing words carefully, building a fragile narrative. "I kept it in my jewelry box," she said. "I never sold it. I was going through a hard time, yes, but I'd never do that to Dad." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the little sister I used to know, the one who used to sneak into Dad's study and listen to his old records with me. But just as quickly, it was gone. When it was my turn, I told the truth, or what I believed was the truth, that she had sold it, that she'd confessed to it in person, that she'd said she needed it for her Botox. Leah's eyes flashed with anger. "That's not true," she snapped. "You're twisting it." "Twisting what?" I shot back. "You told me yourself, Leah." She shook her head, tears forming. "You don't understand. I needed to do it, but I didn't mean that. I meant—" Her voice faltered, her breathing quickened. The officer stepped in again, trying to calm things down, but it was useless. The air was electric with resentment, guilt, and years of unspoken things. The interview ended in tension. Leah was allowed to leave, but not before glancing back at me, a look I couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sorrow. It was something else entirely, something closer to fear. I wanted to chase after her, to demand the truth, but I couldn't move. The officer gave me the watch back, saying it was legally mine since my father had named me as executor of his estate. I signed the papers and walked out into the cool night air, clutching the evidence bag like it was my last anchor. The city felt different, louder, sharper, every shadow a question. At home, I placed the watch on the table and stared at it for what felt like hours. It ticked faintly, steady and calm, as if mocking the chaos it had caused. I wanted to feel relief, but unease coiled around me instead. Why had Leah lied? Or had she? The idea of someone breaking into her apartment wasn't impossible. She wasn't exactly careful with who she let into her life, but something about it didn't sit right. That night, I couldn't stop replaying her face. The tremor in her voice when she said I didn't understand. Understand what? Around 2 a.m., I finally gave up on sleep and called her. No answer. I texted her. "We need to talk. Please." Nothing. The next morning, I went to her apartment again. The door was slightly ajar. My chest tightened as I pushed it open. Inside, the place was a mess. Drawers pulled open, couch cushions tossed, papers scattered. It looked like a real break-in this time. "Leah!" I called out, stepping cautiously inside. No answer. The air smelled like perfume and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or just fear. I found her phone on the floor, cracked. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The lock screen was shattered, but I could still see the last notification. Missed call. Dr. Vance Clinic. My stomach sank. Dr. Vance, her cosmetic surgeon. I'd heard the name before. She'd mentioned him when bragging about her touch-ups. I didn't know why, but I suddenly felt I had to go there. The clinic was on the upper floor of a sleek glass building downtown, all white walls, soft music, the faint scent of antiseptic and luxury. The receptionist smiled politely, her eyes scanning me like I didn't belong there. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for my sister, Leah," I said. "She's a patient here." The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Dr. Vance isn't seeing anyone today," she said quickly. "And I'm afraid we can't give out patient information." I leaned closer. "Please. She might be in trouble." Something in my voice must have reached her, because after a pause, she sighed and disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, a man in a white coat emerged. Tall, neatly dressed, too composed. "I'm Dr. Vance," he said. "You're Leah's brother?" I nodded. He gestured for me to follow him to his office. The room was immaculate. No sign of clutter, no warmth either. He closed the door behind us and leaned against his desk. "Leah missed her appointment yesterday," he said. "That's unlike her. She always came in early." His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Has something happened?" I hesitated, debating how much to reveal. "Someone broke into her apartment," I said carefully. "The police are involved. She's missing." Dr. Vance's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. "That's unfortunate," he said flatly. "She was under a lot of stress lately." I studied him. "From what?" He gave a small shrug. "Personal matters. She said she was being followed. Paranoid, maybe. I suggested she take some time off from treatments." My pulse quickened. "Followed by who?" He looked at me for a moment too long. "She never said, but she seemed frightened. Not of me, of someone else." His tone was calm, but there was something in his eyes I didn't trust, something that told me this conversation wasn't over. When I left the clinic, the city felt colder. My thoughts raced. The broken apartment, the missing sister, the watch. It all connected somehow, but not in any way that made sense yet. As I walked to my car, I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. A folded piece of paper. My name was written on it in Leah's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "If you found this, it means I couldn't fix what I started. Don't trust him. Keep the watch safe." My heart pounded. Don't trust who? Vance? Someone else? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. Whatever this was, it was no longer about vanity or family arguments. Something darker had begun to unfold, and I was already too deep in it to turn back. That night, as I sat in the dim light of my living room, the watch ticked steadily on the table. Each second sounded like a countdown. I turned it over, staring at the small engraving on the back. "For every moment that matters." I'd read those words 100 times before, but now they felt different, heavier. My father had said time was something you protect. Maybe that was what Leah had been trying to do in her own twisted way. Maybe she hadn't sold it after all. Maybe she'd been trying to hide it. From who, though? My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, deep and calm. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." The line went dead. What would you do if you got a call like that? Would you go to the police again? Or would you start looking for the truth yourself? Comment what your gut tells you. Because that was the moment I realized this wasn't about my sister's vanity. This was about something my father left behind. Something hidden inside that watch. When the call ended, I sat there frozen, my mind roaring with static. That voice, deep, composed, deliberate. It wasn't random. It was measured, confident, as if the man on the other end knew exactly what he was doing. I replayed the sentence in my head. You have something that doesn't belong to you. My eyes went to the table, to the watch still ticking under the weak glow of the lamp. I reached for it instinctively, my fingers brushing over the glass, feeling the pulse of time through it. "What the hell did you get yourself into, Leah?" I whispered. The letter she'd left on my windshield burned in my pocket like a secret. Don't trust him. Who was him? Vance? Someone else? The walls felt like they were closing in. I had to move. I grabbed my coat and the watch and drove through the sleeping city, the streetlights stretching like threads of light across the windshield. Every red light felt like a threat, every shadow like an eye watching me. I ended up outside Leah's apartment again, crime scene tape now fluttering across the doorway. I ducked under it, ignoring the gnawing voice in my head that said this was a bad idea. Inside, the air felt stale. The mess was still there, untouched since I'd last been here. But now I was looking for something specific. If Leah had been scared, she would have hidden something. She was impulsive, yes, but she wasn't stupid. I started searching. Under drawers, inside shoes, behind framed photos. Nothing. Then, as I turned toward the kitchen, I noticed the refrigerator slightly out of place. It had scrape marks on the floor, like it had been moved recently. I pushed it aside, and there, taped to the wall behind it, was an envelope. My name again, written in her handwriting. My heart thudded painfully as I tore it open. Inside were two things: a folded note and an old photo. The photo was of my father, younger, standing next to a man I didn't recognize. They were shaking hands in front of what looked like an office building. The other man's smile didn't reach his eyes. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, were the words, "Vance, 1998. The note was shorter. "Dad's watch isn't just a keepsake. It's evidence. Don't let anyone open it. Not even you." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Evidence? Of what? My father had been a construction foreman, a hard worker, honest to the bone. What could he possibly have been mixed up in that would require evidence hidden in a watch? I turned it over in my hands again, inspecting every inch. Then I noticed it. A faint seam around the edge of the casing, barely visible. It wasn't just decorative. It was a compartment. My hands shook as I searched for something small enough to pry it open. A butter knife from her kitchen did the trick. I wedged the tip into the seam and twisted gently until the back popped open with a soft click. Inside was a thin microfilm, the kind used decades ago to store documents or photographs. I held it up to the light. There were words and signatures, but I couldn't make them out. My pulse raced. Whatever this was, it had been sealed away for years. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos just in case. I didn't even hear the footsteps at first. Soft, deliberate, behind me. Then a voice. "I told you not to open it." I froze. That voice again. The same one from the phone. I turned slowly. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, well-dressed, his face calm but his eyes sharp. I recognized him immediately, though I wished I didn't. Dr. Vance. His expression was unreadable, but his presence filled the room with quiet threat. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Neither should you," I shot back, clutching the watch. "Where's Leah?" His eyes flicked briefly to the open compartment in my hand. "You shouldn't have found that," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Where is she?" I demanded again, louder this time. He sighed, stepping closer, hands raised in mock surrender. "Your sister was supposed to bring me that watch," he said, "but she got nervous. She didn't understand what she was holding." "So you scared her?" I snapped. His mouth curved into a faint, unsettling smile. "Scared? No. I simply reminded her that some things are better left buried." The way he said it sent a chill through me. I took a step back, gripping the watch tighter. "What's on this film?" I asked. "You already know enough," he said. "Your father and I had business. Let's just say he documented things he shouldn't have." My mind flashed to the photo, the handshake, the falseness in that other man's smile. "You were partners," I said. "In what?" His eyes hardened. "In something that built this city," he said cryptically, "and destroyed lives along the way." He moved closer. "Give me the watch. You don't understand what you're holding." "Then tell me," I said, my voice shaking. "Tell me what's so important about my father's old watch." His gaze softened slightly, almost pitying. "Your father wanted to expose me," He thought he was doing the right thing. But good intentions don't erase consequences. My stomach turned. You're lying. He sighed again. Believe what you want, but that film, if it gets out, will ruin everything your father worked for. Worked for? I laughed bitterly. He died sick and broke. Vance's expression didn't change. He made choices. He said simply, ones you'll have to live with if you're not careful. Then he stepped closer, his tone dropping to a whisper. Hand it over, and I'll make sure this ends quietly. You and your sister can walk away. The mention of Leah hit me like a blade. Where is she? I demanded again. His jaw tightened. She panicked, he said flatly. She ran. I don't know where she is now, and I don't particularly care. That was enough. I lunged forward, shoving him back, and bolted for the door. He shouted something behind me, but I didn't stop. My hands shook as I started the car, adrenaline roaring through my veins. I didn't know where to go. The police. They'd think I was insane. The media? Who would believe me? Then I remembered. The officer from before. The one with the kind eyes. She'd believed me once. Maybe she would again. I drove straight to the station. She was still there, finishing paperwork. When she saw me, she frowned. You look like hell, she said. What happened? I placed the watch on her desk and whispered, I think my father was murdered. That got her attention. I explained everything. The photo, the letter, the microfilm, Vance's threats. She listened silently, her eyes darkening with every detail. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, then we're dealing with more than a stolen heirloom. She called in a tech team to analyze the microfilm while I sat there, trying not to fall apart. Hours passed. The sky outside began to lighten. The techs worked in silence until one of them finally looked up. You need to see this, he said. On the screen were scanned images from the microfilm, construction permits, falsified safety reports, bribe ledgers. My father's signature was there too, but so was Vance's. The documents were decades old, tied to a massive development project that had collapsed, killing several workers. I remembered hearing about it as a kid. An accident, they'd called it. My father had carried that guilt to his grave, but now I saw the truth. He hadn't been guilty. He'd been silenced. The watch had been his insurance. My hands were trembling as I stared at the screen. All those years of thinking he was just unlucky, when in reality, he'd been protecting us. He tried to expose him, I whispered. The officer nodded grimly. And your sister must have found out. That's why she was scared. My chest tightened. We have to find her, I said. She agreed, putting out an alert. Within hours, they traced her phone signal to an abandoned warehouse by the docks, the same site from those old documents. When we arrived, the place was quiet, eerily so. The officer drew her weapon. My pulse pounded as we stepped inside. Dust motes swirled through the beams of our flashlights. Then, faintly, I heard it. A voice. Weak. Trembling. Here, Leah. She was tied to a chair, bruised but alive. I ran to her, tearing the ropes off. She clung to me, sobbing. I'm sorry, she cried. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. He said he'd help me if I gave him the watch. I thought it was just about money. I didn't know. I held her tighter. It's over, I said. We've got proof. He's finished. But even as I said it, a noise echoed behind us. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Vance. His voice carried through the darkness. You really think it ends like this? He said, stepping into the light, a gun in his hand. You don't understand. That evidence doesn't just ruin me. It ruins everything this city stands on. The officer raised her weapon. Drop it, Vance. He hesitated, then smirked. Your father thought the same thing, he said softly. He didn't realize some truths are too heavy to survive. The next seconds blurred into chaos. Shouting, a gunshot, the crash of glass. When it cleared, Vance was on the ground, disarmed and bleeding, the officer standing over him. Leah was shaking uncontrollably in my arms. Outside, the sirens wailed, growing louder, closer, like justice finally catching up to time itself. In the aftermath, the truth came out. The documents led to one of the biggest corruption scandals the city had ever seen. Vance and his partners were exposed, and my father's name was cleared posthumously. Leah recovered slowly, guilt heavy but healing. The watch, now sealed in evidence, became a symbol not of betrayal, but of redemption. For the first time in years, I visited Dad's grave. The sky was clear, the air still. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and whispered, "You were right. Time isn't something you own. It's something you protect." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had finally done just that. If this story moved you, if you felt every second of it ticking in your chest, don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this one remind us, no matter how dark the truth gets, there's always light waiting at the end. Morning came softly that day, as if the world itself was trying to apologize for everything that had happened. For the first time in weeks, I woke without panic tightening my chest. The sun filtered gently through the blinds, brushing across my hands, and in that fragile light, it felt like life was trying to start over. The city outside moved on, unaware of the nights that had changed everything, unaware of how one broken family had unearthed a truth buried beneath decades of silence. I made coffee, the same way my father used to, slow and deliberate. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that hurts. It was the kind that listens. Leah was staying with me now. She slept late, her body still recovering, her spirit fragile but flickering with the first signs of healing. Sometimes when I passed her room, I'd hear her whisper in her sleep, fragments of apologies, or maybe memories, and I'd feel that same ache of love and sadness, all tangled together. It's strange how forgiveness doesn't come all at once. It creeps in, quiet and hesitant, like dawn through a half-closed curtain. You want to resist it because anger feels like armor, but eventually, you realize armor gets heavy. I found myself wanting to put it down. A week after Vance's arrest, I was called to the station to collect what remained of my father's belongings. The watch, now sealed in an evidence bag again, sat on the desk like an old friend who'd been through hell but still kept time. The officer, the same one who'd believed me from the start, smiled faintly as she handed it over. "You know," she said, "your father would be proud. He left the truth in your hands, and you didn't let it die." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. I wanted to say I didn't deserve that pride, that I'd spent years not seeing Leah's pain, not asking the right questions. But I just nodded, too full of emotion to speak. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the watch on the passenger seat. Every tick felt alive, not mechanical, not cold. Alive, like it was breathing again. I thought about everything it had survived. Time, greed, betrayal, even blood. My father had always believed that time tells the truth eventually. Maybe that was his final gift. Not the watch itself, but the patience it symbolized. The idea that even when everything falls apart, time keeps moving forward, carrying you with it, if you let it. That evening, Leah and I went to the cemetery together. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. We stood by our father's grave in silence for a long while. I watched her trace the letters of his name with trembling fingers. "I hated him for a long time," she whispered. "I thought he left us with nothing." Her voice broke, and I placed a hand on her shoulder. "He left us more than we ever understood," I said softly. "We just weren't ready to see it." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I didn't sell the watch because I didn't care," she said. "I did it because I thought if I could fix the outside, maybe I could stop feeling so broken inside. But it never works, does it?" I shook my head. "No, but you don't have to fix the past to forgive yourself." We stayed there until the sky dimmed into gold and violet. When we finally turned to leave, I took the watch from my pocket, wound it gently, and set it down on the stone. The second hand began to move, a steady rhythm of life continuing. "For every moment that matters," I whispered, repeating the engraving, "and this one does." The weeks that followed felt different. The city, once heavy with shadows, seemed to breathe again. The news spread about the corruption scandal. Names, faces, and decades of deceit dragged into daylight. My father's name appeared in the papers, too, cleared of wrongdoing. "A man who tried to do the right thing," the headline said. For years he'd been forgotten, his reputation dulled by rumor. Now he was remembered for what he truly was, a man who fought for integrity, even when it cost him everything. and that meant more to me than I could ever explain. Leah started volunteering at a rehabilitation center soon after. She told me she wanted to help people who'd been where she'd been, chasing something hollow, trying to fill the void with anything shiny. Watching her change was like watching a storm finally break into sunlight. The anger, the vanity, the fear, it all began to fade. One evening, she came home smiling, really smiling for the first time in years. I met a woman today who said she used to hate herself until she heard my story, she told me. She said it made her feel less alone. I saw it then, the version of Leah I'd been missing all this time, the one who'd been buried beneath regret but never truly lost. As for me, I started writing again. Not for anyone else, not for the world, just for myself. I wanted to remember, to understand, to make sense of the time we'd wasted and the lessons we'd nearly missed. Writing became my way of breathing again. Sometimes I'd glance at the empty spot on my desk where the watch used to sit and feel both sadness and peace. Because I realized something. The watch had done its job. It had protected what mattered. Not just my father's truth, but the bond between Leah and me, the one that had been fractured and healed through fire. Months passed, and seasons turned. The world kept moving, as it always does. One afternoon, as I was walking home, I caught sight of a young man in a cafe window, laughing with his sister, the same warmth I used to feel before everything went wrong. It made me stop for a moment. I smiled, because that's what time does, doesn't it? It gives you chances, to lose, to learn, to rebuild, to find beauty even in the cracks. Sometimes I still hear my father's voice in my head, not loud, not dramatic, just that calm steadiness he always carried. Time isn't something you own, he'd said. It's something you protect. I finally understood what he meant. Protecting time isn't about holding on to it. It's about using it well, loving deeply, forgiving quickly, and letting go when it's time to move forward. The last time Leah and I visited his grave, she brought a new watch. Simple, silver, nothing fancy. She set it beside his stone. For him, she said, smiling softly. So he never runs out of time again. I looked at her, at how far she'd come, and felt something like peace settle in my chest. We stood there in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the colors melting into the earth like an ending that finally felt right. On the drive back, Leah turned to me and said quietly, "Do you think he knows?" I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "He knows." And somewhere, deep inside, I swear I heard the faint ticking of a watch. Steady, eternal, alive. If this story reached you, if it reminded you that forgiveness, no matter how late, can still heal, then leave a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe. Because sometimes, all it takes is one broken watch to remind us that time, when used with love, can mend anything.